Hello, this is Dr. Randy Wilt, and today we're going to be talking about conflict management, and this first part is our part one, and we also have a part two. And we're talking about actually conflict management skills and how you can achieve the very best possible outcome or results from a conflict. Now, this yellow slide, did you know yellow is the one color that irritates people the very most? Now, I don't know why. They've everything from yellow school buses when we're growing up to yellow signs in the traffic. But I put this up here because I want to start off. We're going to be in a conflict here. So let's talk a little bit about conflict. As we get into it, we're going to ask you first, what happens when you have a conflict and it just doesn't go away? Well, let me tell you what happens. Nothing gets done and everyone remains unhappy. I love this little picture here. This is not Photoshop. This is actually a picture of President Bush, and this was the president of Israel and the president of the Palestinian Republic. And he's handing each one of them a revolver. And you may sit there and think, now this has been Photoshopped because they're trying to say, go out there and have a duel. But no, actually, it's not. This was his parting gift. Both of these people guys came to Camp David. As they're leaving, he gave them each a revolver. But once again, it always looks a little bit like he's saying, okay, you can get along, go out there and have a duel over it. Well, let's talk about conflict. First of all, the definition. Conflict is a struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference. Now, from achieving their goals. This is the Wilmot Hawker, 2001, probably the smartest people when it comes down to understanding conflict. But let's break this down and kind of explain a little bit in detail about this. I'm going to use the example of buying a car. Let's say you're going to go off and you're going to buy a car. Well, you have two interdependent parties, and another word for interdependent would be a dependent parties. They're dependent upon each other, and the reason why is because you need to buy a car. You're dependent upon that car dealership to sell you the car. And as a car dealership, they're dependent upon you to buy the car, because if no one buys the car, then they go out of business, obviously. So you got two people who are dependent upon each other in whatever their actions are. If you don't need to buy a car, hey, there's no conflict, is there? Next of all, you have the incompatible goals. And let's use the example that you want to buy the car and the car is going to be $30,000, but you only have $20,000. So your goal is to buy a car for $20,000. Their goal is to sell it to you for $30,000. So you have different goals. You have incompatible goals. That's what causes a conflict. Next, scarce resources. Resources can be anything in the world, but let's talk about just the resource of money. Let's say you have $20,000. You can go out and you can borrow another $5,000 from your cousin, but the car is going to be sold for $30,000. So you don't have the money to get from that 25 to the 30. So here's a case where your resources are scarce, and that's going to cause a conflict because it's also going to go over to the incompatible goals. Now, when you're talking about resources, think about things like water and land. All these are considered resources that can cause conflict. The last one is the interference. The interference and all these things coming together will cause the conflict. And the interference is when one person, one party interferes with the other who is trying to accomplish something. So here we got the case where they're trying to sell the car for $30,000. You want to buy it for $20,000. The car dealer is causing interference because you're interfering with you doing what you want to do. You want to buy the car. You actually are also interfering with them because what are they trying to do? They're trying to sell the car. If they feel like that, you're not going to buy the car, they'll just walk away and go to someone else. That conflict, and that's what we call a caucus. You just kind of leave. It's a walk away. A caucus is where you go and you think about it and come back. But sometimes you just have this walk away. Now let's talk a little bit more about why we encounter conflicts. We encounter them because we're competing for acceptance, recognition, position, power, and meeting goals. What I just talked to you about was the idea of meeting goals. But maybe you get into conflict with your professor or maybe with your boss, a manager or whatever. That could be over position or power or recognition. Now let's talk just a second here also about why conflict happens. It happens because not only these reasons, but also because of the environment. You may be in conflict in an organizational environment, in an academic environment, between you and your supervisor, between you and your subordinates, you and your professor, vice versa. And sometimes people just get in conflict for public speaking. And I always throw this in here because people don't realize that when you're getting up and talking to people, it doesn't matter if you're talking to a one-on-one or if you're talking to a group of people, you actually can throw them into a public speaking conflict. Why does that happen? Is because they are trying to accept you for what you're saying, but you may be putting out a message that they see as being hostile or confrontational. They're not being open-minded about things. They've got goals, you've got goals. So even though you may think you are actually talking about something that's positive, it can actually be negative, causing the conflict. For example, you see Pope Benedict up here. When could he ever go into conflict? Well, maybe he's talking about a policy of the church, and that's thrown some of the people in the audience into a conflict. Now, there's a few things in conflict that we need to always remember. First of all, and these are what we call our assumptions, that conflict is inevitable. It will happen. I've had people say, I never have had a conflict in my life. Well, flat, they are lying. We all go into conflict. Next thing is all parties tend to believe their opinion is a fact. And the next one is each party sees him or herself as the innocent victim who represents truth and fairness. Go back to that example I gave you about buying a car. You have $20,000. They want $30,000. You see yourself as the innocent victim because that car is only worth to you $20,000. Oh, maybe 22, 23, but they're charging $30,000. They're trying to take advantage of you. They, on the other hand, they're looking at you saying, you're trying to, this guy's trying to lowball us. He's trying to offer us $20,000 for a car that is worth $28,000 or $30,000. Next thing is conflict is neither good nor bad. And the last thing is conflict helps us to clarify and helps people to understand each other. So it clarifies our goals and helps us understand. Now go back up to that conflict is neither bad nor good. Back when I first started studying conflict many years ago, they used to say conflict was always bad. Well, now it's a little bit different because we look at it now and we say no, because conflict, now, not if it happens all the time, but when it happens occasionally, it helps you to clarify goals. It helps you to understand what the other party wants and what their goals are. Now, there's three approaches to conflicts, power, rights, and interests. And let me explain this by let's talking about me as a professor and you maybe as a student, or me as a boss and you as an employee. The power I would have as a professor or the CEO is I have a status and a rank. I can hire you, fire you, I can pass you, I can fail you. But you have rights, and those rights is that if I do something wrong, that you can literally pursue that up to the legal matters, maybe at the university, or maybe just, let's say, the courts in case of a corporate environment. And so you have the rights, and that's another way we approach conflict. And the last way is because we have shared interests. For example, I want you to learn. You want to learn. So we're trying to meet each other, but maybe what I'm trying to teach you is something that you do not agree with. And so therefore you get into that type of conflict. Now, major points of resolution. This is from Fisher, Urey, and Patton. There's another group that are just the gurus of conflict. They say separate the people from the problem, invent options for mutual gain, and know when to walk away. Remember what I was talking about a while ago? Sometimes when you're trying to buy a car and it just doesn't work, walk away. There's nothing wrong with walking away to come back and to negotiate another day, as they say. But let's talk about this separating people from the problem. This is a classic thing that we need to always remember. And I'm going to give you the example. My wife and I, we were choosing to go out and eat. We just couldn't figure out which restaurant we wanted to go to. She wanted Mexican food. I wanted Italian food. She said, we ate Italian food last week. I said, well, we ate Mexican food the week before that, and I'm tired of Mexican food. And she said, you're always tired of Mexican food. And I said, well, you never let me have my way. Matter of fact, when I wanted to take a trip and go up to New York City, you wouldn't let me because you said that you didn't want to go to New York City. And she comes back and she said, well, it's a stupid place to go, but that was a stupid decision on your part to go to New York City because it's just not the place that you can feel safe walking around the neighborhoods. Okay, now folks, what's happened there is that what was the problem? The problem was where we're going to go eat, Mexican or Italian. Where did it go to? It went from where we're going to eat to decisions to the vacation to I make stupid decisions because New York City is not a safe place to walk out. So it went from the problem to the people. This is the reason why Fisher and Urey says you got to separate the people from the problem. Because the moment we go over into New York City, and Randy, you are stupid to think we're going up there. I should have pulled it back and said, okay, you know what? That's a discussion on its own. We're talking about where we're going to eat tonight, Mexican or Italian. Invent options for mutual gain. So that's a case where you've got to do something that is going to make both parties happy. You both have to give up some, but you're trying to find a mutual gain in there, and of course know when to walk away. Now I'm going to give you some examples here that is very, very interesting. This is a Dr. Gottman, and he is a psychologist up in the Northwest. And many years ago, he was able to look at young couples when they were engaged, and he could tell within 20 years if they were going to stay married. Kind of interesting, isn't it? And he had like about an 80-85% success rate. And people say, how did this all come about? Well, he looked at four things, and these four things is what he called the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which if you know your Bible, that's in the book of Revelation. And they are criticizing, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And what Dr. Gottman was saying is that if any one of these happens, you're okay. If 2 or 3 happens, you're fine. But if 4 of these happens, then you have a broken relationship. And he was able to talk to young couples and get a good idea about the way they looked at criticizing, defensiveness, stonewalling, contempt. And he was able to make a pretty good judgment upon who was going to still be married in 20 years. And of course, after 20 years, he went back and looked at these couples, and he was right 85% of the time. So I'm going to give you the example, and we're going to go back to that example about the Mexican food, and this time I'm going to show you a picture. This is my Mexican food. Well, actually, it's my wife's Mexican food. She loves Mexican food. She wants to go eat Mexican food. Well, okay. I like it, but I'm really, really a fan of Italian food. So my idea was, let's go eat Italian food. But she said, if you remember, she said last week, she said, we went off and we had your Italian food. And I said, but the previous week, we went and had your Mexican food. And she said, but we are always eating Italian food. And I said, no, you're always eating Mexican food. I never get to do what I want to do. You're always making me do what I want to do instead of allowing me to make my own decisions. Now, what is happening there? This is the criticizing. This is the horse number one, let's say, that I'm criticizing her. She is criticizing me. You're never letting me make the decision. You're always deciding, no, that's not correct. You're always deciding. So now we're criticizing. According to Gottman, at this point, I can say, honey, I'm sorry. You know, we don't need to be arguing. We make up, let's go eat your Mexican food. Okay, then everything's great, but unfortunately, lots of time it doesn't get to that point. We go to point 2, horse number 2, which is defensiveness. And this is where I'm saying we always eat Mexican food, and she comes back very defensively and says, no, we don't. Last week, we ate Italian food. You are lying when you say we always eat Mexican food. And of course, I could be defensive by saying, well, look who's lying about things, because no, last week we ate, well, hamburgers. You're making it up. Okay, now here we have a case where we have defensiveness. Once again, Gottman says, at this point, you can still make up, and everybody's going to be happy. Honey, I love you. I'm sorry. Let's not argue. Let's go eat a hamburger on that. Then there's a third one, stonewalling. Do you know what stonewalling is? Most people do. They think stonewalling is when you just don't talk to each other, like the little picture right here. Just not talking at all, just blocking it off. Well, let me give you an example. Stonewalling is a little bit more than that. And this is a true example. When I was working on my PhD program, I was studying conflict. And as I was studying about conflict, I went home one weekend and I learned about stonewalling. And I thought, well, for research sake, I was going to try this with my wife. So when I walked in and we were very happy with each other, she said, honey, how are you doing today? I said, fine. And she said, anything happen to you today at school? No. Did you learn anything? No. You're not saying anything. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Well, I did that for an entire Friday evening. Saturday morning, I got up and she started again. Honey, what do you want for breakfast? I don't care. Well, do you want me to fix eggs, or do you feel like maybe a breakfast taco? I don't care. What is wrong with you? Why won't you talk to me? I'm talking to you. And then it kept going on all that day. And Sunday morning, finally she gets up and she says, cut the crap. You are going to talk to me. And at that point, I realized I kind of pushed it too far. So I went in there and said, okay, honey, just this was for the sake of research. I was trying to show what stonewalling works. And she said, like hell you were. You were seeing if you can make me mad. And of course, at that point, I realized it was not a good idea to go in there and try to, for research sake, show what stonewalling is. But you see, what stonewalling is not the break of communications. It could be no communications, even though you're making comments. Like when she said, what do you want to eat? I don't care. Why are you not talking to me? I'm talking to you. So that is a case of stonewalling. Now here you can have the same thing. I remember my wife and I, she wants Mexican food, I want Italian food. I said, that's it. I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. She goes, well, I'm not going to talk to you either. Now what Gottman said is at this point, you've hit 3 of the 4. You can still pull it back, but you're getting close to the point you cannot. And that last point is contempt. In contempt, another way to say that is that you have lost respect for the other person. You have a love or respect or appreciation for another person, and when you lose that, then all of a sudden the relationship falls apart. So in the case where I walk away and I just say, you know what? You're just being stupid about things. I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Okay, that is contempt. I have mediated many cases. I've mediated couples that are about ready to go through a divorce. And what I've always found is that the love and respect that they have for each other when they were first married and when they were young disappeared for some reason. They did not respect each other. He did not respect her for what she was. She did not respect him. And when that respect goes away through contempt, then according to Gottman, the relationship craters. It falls apart. And that happens about, very seldom, but it does happen. And when it does happen, you have about a 97 to 98% chance that it just is going to fall apart, like in the case of a divorce. So what do you do in this case here? Well, remember what I said? You try to go and find some way to do a mutual gain. And in my case, the mutual gain would be that, honey, I tell you what, we can go out and have ourselves an Italian burrito. You can have your Mexican food, or maybe we can have ourselves a Mexican pizza. And then when she heard that, she said, that is so good. You're working together. And by the way, this is myself, if you haven't seen me before, and my wife standing in front of our house. And when this happens, everyone is happy because you've worked toward a mutual gain, and then you live happily ever after. No, that's not my house. That's actually, I think, Peter the Great in St. Petersburg. So certainly not my house. That's the end of part 1. Please come back for part 2. We're going to talk a little bit more. Now we're going to go into the different types of conflict management style. We'll talk to you then.